This is Larry Sicular introducing Nick Connon to be interviewed as part of this listening project. Nick was introduced to me by John Phillip, who is the first person that I interviewed for this project. And Nick is joining us, or joining me, from Los Angeles this morning. Nick, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. And a shout out to John Phillip, who is actually a former law school comrade of mine. We both went to Columbia together, and he's a dear friend. So appreciate him introducing the two of us. I grew up in Indiana, the northwest part of Indiana, in a town called Crown Point. And I got my undergraduate degree from Indiana University, which is a wonderful university, and I'm still involved with the university and working with students and providing different opportunities for the students. After I graduated from Indiana University, I went to Columbia Law School in New York City. And after graduating there, I came to Los Angeles, California, where I have been ever since. And I practice law here in California. I'm a litigator, which means that I'm an advocate and I'm representing people in court, federal, state court, arbitrations. And my firm has offices here in Los Angeles, but also in London. We do international litigation work around the world. And so I am finding myself frequently dealing with people from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different cultures, lots of different legal systems, and having a dialogue about those things and explaining our system and understanding their system and understanding the different perspectives that people have in the legal world, which when you get to know people, you start to have conversations that broaden and go beyond that and try to understand who they are as people, as a community. And so I've had the good fortune of integrating those discussions into my, as a part of my professional career as well.
Is this mostly business law?
Litigation. A lot of it is business litigation. We sometimes get involved in representing executives around the world. I do also a fair amount of employment litigation. And so issues related to executive contracts and those types of things also can be a part of what we litigate.
So in some cases, you're partnering with lawyers in other jurisdictions to handle cases in front of their courts, correct?
We do that frequently. We have relationships with other lawyers around the world, actually, and sometimes we help them here in the United States, and other times they help us in the jurisdictions where litigation may be, or in connection with an arbitration where they may have a client that is located in their country, and we're dealing with the arbitration and have to coordinate and cooperate with each other.
So you have a very unusual perspective, at least among my small group of speakers so far. Let me start with these very broad questions that I sent to you last week. I think we all agree that the world is a very difficult and complex place right now. And I'm looking for you to explain to us how you would define that and what you would do about it.
With the world being complex and a lot of challenges in communicating and working together.
Yes.
Well,
what are the big issues?
Yeah, well, certainly in the United States, reached the point, and I don't know that it's a recent phenomenon, but we certainly are a polarized society. You probably can, everybody can probably relate to this, because if you have a discussion today about politics, particularly with people that have different views of politics, or different views of policy issues. Those are difficult conversations to have because they very quickly can turn very personal. And I think people can have a real challenge of listening. That's one of the reasons I love your project, because I do think that people have a real challenge of listening to each other and trying to really understand where people are coming from. Everybody has different life experiences. Everybody has a different cultural experience. Even in the United States, there's many different cultures that are here. That's one of the beauties of the United States, in my opinion. And I think it is difficult for us to put ourselves in another person's shoes to really understand their perspective and then try to explain our perspective in a way that that they can relate. And instead, what ends up happening is we hear something that triggers a negative reaction in our own belief system and our own identities. I think one's identity is becomes very protective. People have a certain identity of themselves. So, for example, if you have an identity that is, let's say, a religious identity, and you feel very strongly about that and about your beliefs, and somebody says something disparaging that goes to the heart of that identity, you are going to react. That's going to trigger you because that's something that's very important to you. And I see this all the time in litigation. In addition to my litigation practice, I'm also a federal court mediator. And so I get involved in other people's litigation in an effort to see if we can resolve cases and bring people together who are currently in fights in federal court. And often as the mediator, I get to go back and forth between two different rooms where the rooms can talk to me and express to me their perspectives and their views of things. And then I go in the other room and I often hear a completely different viewpoint. But often during those separate discussions particularly, and sometimes when the parties even get together, there are statements that are made that go to the core of someone's identity. So for example, if it's a dispute over a contract, but then one side starts to say that the other side is dishonest, and the side that's being accused of dishonesty really values their integrity, as most people do, that is going to trigger a very negative response. And oftentimes we don't realize sometimes in the conversations that we have with people what their identities are in their entirety. You may be having a conversation with someone about a particular issue, like the police or like racial justice, and you're having just what you think is a normal conversation, but you've triggered something because you've said something that has hit on the person's core identity, something that they really believe in, something that has been a part of them maybe most of their life. And that creates a wall that goes up with people and a barrier to conversations. And so I think it's important for all of us to step back. Again, one of the reasons I love your project is to step back and realize that in having these conversations, we're going to say things that may cut to the core of someone else. And it doesn't mean that we're trying to attack them. It means that we have a certain perspective of the situation, and the person we're talking to may have a very different perspective, and you may have said something that has been highly offended without even knowing it. And I think we do have to be sensitive to that. But on the flip side of that, I think we also have to be mindful that people are going to say things that we all find offensive, that we all disagree with, that we have a different perspective on. And I think we have to give all of us a little bit of flexibility to say those things and then have productive discussions about it. And so, you know, there's a conflict right now going on in the United States in terms of racial justice and the interaction with underrepresented communities, with the police. And people can bring very different perspectives to that conversation. But those conversations are really important to have in a way where we can start to try to understand each other. And in understanding each other, I'm confident that we can come up with approaches to problems and to issues that are a win-win for everyone. Something that brings people together, something that makes future dealings between, for example, the police and minority communities a better interaction, a more productive interaction. I do believe that that can be accomplished, not without work and not without understanding and listening to each other and really trying to work cooperatively. And those are the types of things that I think if you broaden that on an international basis, is kind of my perspective as well. You know, I do believe that we're going to have frictions. For example, the United States is going to have frictions with a lot of countries around the world, but there's common ground. There's common ways that we can interact, you know, in a productive way many times. Sometimes not, and sometimes, depending upon what those differences are, call for different approaches. But often we can find common ground, whether it's on an individual level and having a conversation with someone, on a broader level on policy issues here in the United States or talking about politics, or on a broader level internationally. I do believe that people can find a lot more common ground than often they do find, because they stop short of exploring those things, and often stop short of exploring them because they've been triggered by something that puts up a wall. There's a gentleman named Daryl Davis who did a documentary called Accidental Courtesy. And if anybody listening to this has not watched that documentary, I would highly recommend it. If you have Amazon Prime, it is free on Amazon Prime. And Daryl Davis is a black man, originally grew up in Chicago, now lives in Maryland, just outside of DC. And he has gone around the country for 30 years or so, meeting with members of the Ku Klux Klan. And these are people that their ideology is to hate him, and yet he is engaging with them. And he has about a couple dozen, 25 Klan leaders. These are not just normal folks. These are leaders of the KKK who have left the KKK because of his engagement with them. And when they leave the KKK, they give him their robes and hoods, which he keeps at his house. Now, I say, if a man is a very special man, obviously, and very, wise man, but if someone like Daryl Davis can meet with the KKK, I think all of us can find it inside ourselves to try to discuss with each other in a positive way a lot of these issues and try to find common ground.
Do you feel that these sensitivities, as they relate to people's being able to listen to each other, have heightened during your working lifetime? Do you feel people are more or less able to hear each other now than they were, say, 20 years ago?
You know, it is possible. That's a hard question for me to answer, I should say. I think social media has had an impact on our culture. And in that sense, one could argue that because in social media, we are often in the echo chamber. And what I mean by that is we tend to look on social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever other platform we're watching, we tend to like to look at those things that reinforce either our identities or our own viewpoints. And for those things that we find irritating, we tend to ignore them or block them. And so in that sense, social media reinforces kind of a mindset of staying where you are in your own thought process. You know, continuing to adopt the viewpoints that you already hold, and unwilling to perhaps consider other viewpoints that might be different than yours. So I'll give you an example. When I'm looking, I don't do a lot on social media, but when I'm on Facebook, I see these feeds that are given to me, and oftentimes the feeds are kind of very similar, presumably because Facebook has seen, some things that I've looked at, and they're feeding me candy because they know, well, he likes that, so he'll like this and he'll like this. I do think there is a danger in that it cements people and their viewpoints a bit. So if social media has had that impact on people, it may make it more difficult when people are in a different setting, either outside of social media or now in the political season, listening to the various candidates, to approach what they're getting there with a more open mind, because that may not be what the mind is used to in the social media world that a lot of people live in. So in that sense, I could see that the views are becoming more difficult to change. On the other hand, one could look at social media and the internet and say, back 30 years ago when the internet didn't exist, and for example, when I was a student, if I had to write a paper, the amount of effort that I had to do to gather the facts, to go to the library, to find the right books, to get the information that I needed, was compared today of sitting in the computer and looking at the resources online. It was a Herculean effort to get that information. Now, with the internet and the information age, I have a lot of data and information available to me. So to the extent that I was misled or ignorant about certain information, there is a lot more available to me, which you would think would cause people to have a bit more fluidity in their willingness to challenge a belief system or understanding that they have had. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in terms of people's willingness to change their beliefs today or have that type of dialogue. I would say this. I think social media, because it's so much of a part, that's where we start. And that makes it perhaps more difficult and solidifies people's viewpoints. But when people do have conversations, and I don't know, Larry, if you've had this experience, but you have a conversation with someone and they say something that you find interesting and intriguing, that maybe you haven't heard before. And you may push back on it because it doesn't fit into your narrative or your viewpoint or your identity, but you're interested in it. And you go now back in your private time and you start to poke around on the internet, and lo and behold, what the person said seems to be true. And it causes you in your private moments to reflect, and then to maybe realize, outside of a battle of your own viewpoints where you have to save face and you have to, hold the line, so to speak, you realize, something, that's an interesting way of looking at it. And again, coming back to this gentleman, Daryl Davis, who I'm a big fan of, when he engages with the Klan leaders, initially, I don't think they embrace him after one conversation with open arms. In fact, he describes in his documentary that often they don't even listen to him. They don't ask him any questions because he doesn't matter. His viewpoints are irrelevant to them. But he said the turning point is he'll say some things to them, and they won't react, or they'll say that's crazy, that's not right, or whatever. But then he realizes over time, maybe when they go back and they start to think about it, they start to look into some things, that, hey, wait a second, he actually said something that's true that I didn't know. And he says the turning point where he can see that they start to come around and question this ideology of hate is when they start to ask him questions. What do you think, Daryl? And that's what I think happens. And that's kind of the beauty of the information age that we live in. There's, you know, some negative aspects to it. It's open to manipulation, as we've seen, but it does allow people access to some information that in their private moments, they can reflect outside of the heat of battle or having to win an argument and start to enlighten themselves a bit more and perhaps gain some progress on views of the world, views of people. So in that sense, maybe it's a little, you know, we have the resources now that if you want to, you can have a bit more productive conversation with yourself. And hopefully then when you have a better conversation with yourself, you can have better conversations with other people. If we look at the racial injustice that is going on at the moment, that is an area where I think people can find common ground. There are people who feel very strongly about supporting the police. And you know, I think we would all recognize that most of us would recognize on both sides of the issue that many times the police find themselves in situations that are difficult situations, that are dangerous situations, where, you know, they, or sometimes they find themselves targets. Not, you know, a few days ago here in Los Angeles, you probably read about it in the news. We had 2 police officers who were outside of a metro station and someone came up, it's on video, and shot them point blank. Both of them fortunately lived, but one of them, you know, was in surgery, you know, for a while, and they were just sitting there, you know, doing paperwork. So, you know, when you put on a uniform, you can become a target. You can be put in situations that are very dangerous, life-threatening situations, and I think everyone would recognize that. On the other hand, police have enormous power in society. They can, you know, they have a license to kill someone under certain circumstances. It's supposed to be, you know, under limited circumstances. We have seen many examples where use of force has resulted in people dying or being seriously injured in ways that we just question, why was that necessary? Why was that appropriate? And so this is an issue that needs to be addressed. It also needs to be addressed in terms of the interaction of the police with the community, and making sure that people within the community are not unfairly targeted and not unfairly harassed by the police. You know, if you are going to scrutinize, we have a lot of laws in the country. Some of them are good laws and important laws, and other laws, you know, all of us might take issue with some of the laws and the appropriateness of them. For example, in California, you know, is it really appropriate if somebody commits some, you know, relatively minor traffic infraction that it costs them a ticket that for over $500? Is that really fair? Is that a fair system? You know, $500 to a lot of people is a disaster if they lose $500. And if they can't pay the ticket, then that remains outstanding, and, you know, they have other potential consequences for them. So, you know, there are laws that all of us probably might take issue with, but where, you know, we have representatives who decide to pass the laws, and the laws can change sometimes. So I do think that if you, with all of the laws that are out there, if you scrutinize a group of people, more so than another group of people, it just statistically, you're going to find a lot more violations by the group of people that you're scrutinizing more heavily. That's just math. And we should ask ourselves, is that appropriate? Is that fair? Should we be scrutinizing, people in our society who happen to live in certain neighborhoods, or people that come into other neighborhoods who don't look like they live in the neighborhood? Should we scrutinize people in a hypersensitive way like that? And what are the consequences of that? I think the math consequences are you're going to find that when you scrutinize people, you're going to find more violations of the law. And is that a society that all of us are going to want to live in? I mean, Larry, if I don't know if you drive because you're in New York City, but if you're driving and you're getting pulled over, all the time, I think you're going to get a bit irritated. And they might actually find, something wrong when they pull you over. Although you seem like a very outstanding citizen, so probably maybe not, Larry.
No, they'll find an opened bottle of wine on the back seat, and that probably is illegal.
Right, and so I think we need to look at this, and we need to look at our communities and making sure that the resources and what is being done by law enforcement is something that all of us would find appropriate in our neighborhoods, and how we want to be treated. And we are a community, in my view, and we all ought to be treated, the same way.
Hi, it's Larry Sicular again. That video with Nick ended a little abruptly due to my rather awkward video editing, but I'd like to thank Nick again for participating in the listening project, and thank you all for listening. And here's a final message from Nick, which is to everyone watching: remember to keep an open mind, keep an open heart, and always keep on listening. Thank you.